He humiliated his wife for being just a housewife until she walked into the courtroom. If you love stories that teach powerful life lessons, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Lisa Reynolds knew her place in her husband's world. She was the quiet supporter, the one who smoothed the creases in his shirts, packed his lunches, and listened to his endless stories about boardroom victories over candle-lit dinners he barely noticed. For 10 years, she had been the woman behind the man, just a housewife, as Daniel liked to remind her. Daniel Reynolds was a corporate attorney, a man whose presence alone could command a room. He thrived on status, on the admiration of his peers, and on being the smartest person in any conversation. He worked long hours, made important decisions, and brought in the kind of money that afforded them a comfortable life in an affluent neighborhood, and he never let Lisa forget it. "You're lucky," he often told her with a smirk, swirling his whiskey after another late-night victory at the office. "Most women would kill to have a man who provides like I do. You don't even have to lift a finger." Lisa had once loved him fiercely. In their early years, before the expensive suits and relentless ambition, Daniel had been different, softer, more attentive. But somewhere along the way, he had rewritten their story. To him, she had become nothing more than the woman who kept the house clean and his meals warm. The final straw came at a dinner party. Their house was filled with the low hum of conversation and clinking glasses. Daniel had invited his colleagues, sharp-tongued, power-hungry men who spoke about money and politics like they were playing chess. Lisa, as always, had played the perfect hostess. She circulated the room, refilling drinks, laughing at the right moments, making sure everything was seamless. And then, it happened. "So, Lisa, what do you do?" asked one of Daniel's partners, a distinguished man with silver at his temples. Lisa barely had a chance to respond before Daniel chuckled and answered for her. "She doesn't work," he said, shaking his head with a condescending smile. "She's just a housewife. Just a housewife." The words landed like a slap. Laughter rippled around the room. Lisa's fingers tightened around the wine glass in her hand. She forced herself to smile, to play along, but something in her shifted in that moment. She looked at Daniel, truly looked at him, and saw him in a way she never had before. The man she had supported, believed in, and sacrificed for had no respect for her. To him, her work, managing their home, raising their son, making sure their lives ran smoothly, was invisible, unimportant. The resentment that had simmered for years finally boiled over. That night, long after their guests had left, Lisa sat in the darkened living room, staring at the fireplace. The woman Daniel had humiliated in front of his colleagues was not the woman she truly was. And for the first time in a long time, she decided to remind him. The next morning, Lisa made a decision. She was done waiting for Daniel to see her worth. While he rushed off to work, barely muttering a goodbye, Lisa sat down at her laptop. She had been out of the workforce for years, but she was far from unskilled. Before becoming a stay-at-home mother, she had pursued law. She had passed the bar, dreamed of making a difference, but life had pulled her in another direction. Now, it was time to take back what she had given up. She made a few calls, dusted off her credentials, and within a week, she had an interview at a prestigious law firm. Not as a secretary, not as an assistant, but as a lawyer. She kept it to herself. Daniel barely noticed the shift. He was too consumed with his own world, too confident that Lisa would always be where he left her. But he was wrong, and soon he would realize it in the most unexpected way. Lisa's first few weeks at the firm were exhilarating. The long-forgotten thrill of debate, the sharp focus of building a case, the satisfaction of using her mind in ways she hadn't in years, it all came rushing back. She worked quietly, determined to prove herself without anyone's help. Her mentors were impressed by her analytical skills, her ability to dissect arguments and find loopholes others missed. What she didn't know was that fate was about to play a cruel joke on Daniel. Because Lisa's first major case? It would be against him. Lisa had spent the last decade standing in Daniel's shadow, but now she was stepping into her own light. Her return to law had been smoother than she expected. The firm had been hesitant at first, a woman who had been out of practice for years, returning after a decade as a housewife. But Lisa was sharp, disciplined, and relentless. She caught up quickly, proving her value within weeks. But she still hadn't told Daniel. It wasn't just secrecy, it was strategy. If he knew, he'd belittle her efforts, tell her she was wasting her time, that she'd never catch up to his level. And she wasn't interested in his approval anymore. She wanted his respect, and she was going to earn it the hard way. Lisa had just settled into her new routine when her senior partner, Jonathan Marks, pulled her aside. "I want you on the Hastings case," he said, handing her a thick file. "It's a big one. Corporate fraud, breach of contract, messy stuff." Lisa's heart pounded as she flipped through the pages. The plaintiff, a small but growing tech company, was suing a major corporate firm for unethical business practices. It wasn't until she reached the defendant's name that her hands froze. Reynolds and Carter LLP, her husband's firm. And worse, Daniel's name was on the case. Lisa's breath caught in her throat. This was it, the moment she had unknowingly been preparing for. She could back out, tell Jonathan it was a conflict of interest, walk away before Daniel ever knew she had even set foot in a courtroom again. Or she could fight for every woman who had been underestimated, for every housewife who had been made to feel invisible, for herself. Lisa looked up at Jonathan, her expression steeled with quiet determination. "I'll take it," she said. The next morning, Daniel sat at the breakfast table, oblivious. He barely looked up from his phone as he read through emails. "I might be late tonight. Big case coming up. High-profile lawsuit, but it'll be an easy win." Lisa sipped her coffee, suppressing a smirk. "Oh, what's the case about?" "Some tech company whining about contracts," Daniel muttered, tapping away on his screen. "They think we screwed them over. But it's business. They don't have a leg to stand on." Lisa glanced at the legal pad she had placed beside her. It was filled with notes, strategies, counter-arguments. She smiled to herself. "We'll see." When Lisa arrived at the courthouse, her pulse quickened. She had been preparing for this moment for weeks, and now it was here. She stepped into the courtroom, her heels clicking against the polished floor. The air buzzed with tension as both legal teams took their places. Then, the moment she had been waiting for, Daniel walked in. He looked confident, cocky even, dressed in his expensive navy suit. He adjusted his tie, flashed a knowing smile to his CO counsel, then turned toward the opposing table, and froze. For the first time in years, Lisa saw something rare on her husband's face. Shock. Confusion flickered in his eyes, his brows furrowing as he stared at her, as if trying to make sense of what he was seeing. His wife, the woman he had dismissed as just a housewife, sitting at the plaintiff's table, legal documents spread before her. Lisa met his gaze with quiet confidence. "Good morning, Mr. Reynolds," she said smoothly. Daniel blinked, his jaw tightening. He recovered quickly, forcing a smirk. "What is this? Some kind of joke?" he whispered as he approached her. Lisa tilted her head. "I don't see anything funny about it. I'm representing the plaintiff. You remember Hastings Tech, don't you?" Daniel scoffed, shaking his head. "Lisa, come on. This isn't your world. Go home before you embarrass yourself." Lisa smiled. "We'll see who's embarrassed." And with that, the trial began. Lisa had spent weeks dissecting Daniel's tactics, anticipating his arguments, preparing her counters. She knew how he thought, knew the arrogance that fueled his confidence. So when Daniel smirked at the judge and said, "Your Honor, this case is baseless. The plaintiff has no proof of misconduct," Lisa was ready. She stood, her voice steady. "Your Honor, if that's the case, I'd like to present Exhibit A." She handed over a set of emails, internal communications from Daniel's firm that proved they had intentionally misled Hastings Tech. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Daniel's expression darkened. He had underestimated her, and it was only the beginning. Daniel sat stiffly at the defense table, his jaw tight, his fingers drumming against the polished wood. Lisa had blindsided him. For the first time in his career, he wasn't in control. His wife, his housewife, was standing across from him, matching him argument for argument, countering his every move. And worst of all, she was winning. Daniel leaned over to his CO counsel, whispering, "Where did she even get those emails?" His colleague shifted uncomfortably. The plaintiff's legal team must have gotten access through discovery. Daniel's fingers curled into a fist. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. Lisa, meanwhile, remained poised, her confidence growing with each passing moment. She had spent years being dismissed, overlooked. Now, she commanded the room. She rose from her chair. "Your Honor, these emails prove that Reynolds and Carter knowingly misled Hastings Tech, inducing them into a fraudulent contract." Daniel shot up from his seat. "Objection. Those emails are taken out of context." Lisa turned to the judge, unfazed. "Then let's provide full context. I move to subpoena the complete correspondence history between the defense and Hastings Tech." The judge adjusted his glasses, considering. Then, with a nod, he granted Lisa's request. Daniel felt his stomach drop. If those emails came out, his firm was in trouble, and so was he. At recess, Daniel stormed out of the courtroom, catching Lisa in the hallway. "This is a joke, right?" His voice was low, furious. "What the hell are you doing, Lisa?" She met his gaze steadily. "My job." Daniel let out a bitter laugh. "Your job? You think this is some game? You don't belong here." Lisa crossed her arms. "You keep saying that, Daniel, and yet I'm here, holding my own against you." His nostrils flared. "You're humiliating me." Lisa stepped closer. "No, Daniel, you humiliated me for years. Every time you dismissed me, every time you made me feel like I was nothing. You did this." For the first time, Daniel had no response. Lisa didn't wait for one. She turned and walked back into the courtroom, leaving her husband standing in stunned silence. The next day, the subpoenaed emails arrived. Lisa scanned the documents, her heart pounding. And there it was, the smoking gun. A direct message from Daniel to his junior associate. "Make sure the contract is just misleading enough that Hastings won't notice until it's too late. They'll either pay up or go bankrupt. Either way, we win." Lisa swallowed hard. This wasn't just unethical. It was illegal. She looked up at Daniel, who was reading the same email, his face paling. He knew. The courtroom was silent as Lisa stood. "Your Honor, I would like to introduce this as evidence of intentional fraud by the defense." The judge took the papers, reading carefully before looking at Daniel. "Mr. Reynolds, would you care to explain this?" For the first time in his career, Daniel was speechless. He had lost. Daniel sat frozen in his chair, staring at the damning email in front of him. His own words, so carelessly typed, now threatened not only his case, but his reputation. The courtroom was silent, all eyes on him. Lisa remained poised at the plaintiff's table, her expression unreadable. She had won. She could press forward, ruin him, humiliate him, just as he had humiliated her so many times before. But that wasn't what she wanted. She didn't want revenge. She wanted respect. The judge cleared his throat. "Mr. Reynolds, this evidence is highly concerning. We will need to review whether your firm engaged in fraudulent practices." Daniel swallowed hard. His mind raced. He could fight back, spin a defense, try to salvage what was left of his credibility. But then, his eyes met Lisa's, and for the first time he truly saw her. She wasn't the quiet, obedient housewife he had taken for granted. She wasn't the woman who simply folded his shirts and planned dinner parties. She was formidable, brilliant, strong. She was his equal, and he had been blind to it for years. Daniel took a deep breath and slowly rose from his seat. His lawyer shot him a wary glance, but he ignored it. "Your Honor," he said, his voice quieter than usual, lacking its usual arrogance, "I would like to request a private settlement discussion with the plaintiff." A murmur spread through the room. Lisa raised an eyebrow. This wasn't what she had expected. The judge considered for a moment before nodding. "Very well. Both parties may step out for mediation." Minutes later, Daniel and Lisa sat across from each other in a private conference room. No judge, no jury, just them. Daniel let out a long breath. "Lisa," his voice was softer now. She folded her arms. "This is a legal discussion, Daniel. If you're not here to negotiate, we can go back inside." He sighed. "I am. But first, I need to say something." Lisa tilted her head, waiting. "I was wrong," he admitted. The words tasted foreign on his tongue, but he forced himself to say them. "Not just about this case, but about you." Lisa's lips parted slightly in surprise. "I spent years acting like my job made me more important than you," he continued. "Like what you did at home wasn't valuable. I was arrogant, dismissive, and I hurt you." Lisa studied him carefully. "And why are you realizing this now?" Daniel exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Because today, I watched you do what I do every day, and you did it better than me." He gave a wry chuckle. "You outmaneuvered me, Lisa, and I deserved it." A flicker of emotion crossed her face, but she stayed composed. "So, what now?" Daniel straightened, his voice steady. "We settled this case. The firm takes responsibility for what happened. We compensate Hastings Tech fairly, and I make sure something like this doesn't happen again." Lisa blinked, genuinely taken aback. "Just like that?" He nodded. "Just like that." For the first time in years, Lisa saw something in her husband's eyes that had been missing for too long. Humility and respect. 2 weeks later, the case was officially settled in favor of Hastings Tech. Daniel's firm took a financial hit, but he made sure to repair the damages. Lisa's firm celebrated her victory, and she received an offer for a permanent position as a lead attorney. She didn't hesitate to accept. One evening, after a long day, Lisa walked into their home to find Daniel in the kitchen, cooking. She stopped in the doorway, raising an eyebrow. "What's this?" Daniel glanced over his shoulder. "Dinner." Lisa smirked. "Since when do you cook?" He shrugged, stirring the sauce. "Figured I should start pulling my weight around here, since you're not just a housewife anymore." Lisa leaned against the counter, watching him. "I never was." Daniel met her gaze and nodded. "I know that now." And for the first time in years, Lisa felt truly seen. Their marriage wasn't perfect. There were wounds that needed time to heal. But for the first time in a long time, they were partners again. And that was enough. Daniel thought he had it all figured out, until his wife stepped into the courtroom and turned his world upside down. This story is a reminder that respect isn't just given, it's earned. What did you think about Lisa's journey? Let's talk about it in the comments below.